All right, preparing to live stream the meeting. I have no idea if it catches this early beginning piece or not, but yeah.
I don't know. Should we record it anyway, just in case it's a blowout, and then we can just...
Okay, we're live. It is live. It is on. It is happening. All right, we've done it. We have got ourselves live on YouTube. Congratulations to us. This is Joanna Walden. She is the author of The Inside Hustle. My name, of course, is Kara-Leah Grant, and I'm the author of Sex, Drugs, and Mostly Yoga. We're just going to take a breath. I'm going to do a little intro while Joanna is going to take the link from the live stream and put it out on her channels. And then once I've done a little intro, Joanna we'll chat a little, and I'll put the link out on my channels. Yes. The delight of text. All right, so Joanna and I met at Revive Festival in Gisborne this year in early January, outside Yoga Tribe, Coca's stall. Coca does amazing things with Yoga Tribe. And I can't remember, Joanna, if you were like holding your book or if I was holding my book, but somehow or other we were in the same space and we each had a copy of our books. I was like, is that your book? And she's like, is that your book? And then we kind of chitter-chatted, and I'm like, do you want to swap? So we exchanged memoirs. I was on the road doing a 5-week festival tour, and Revive was my second festival. So I didn't actually dive into the book until I got home. And then once I dove in, I inhaled it in about 3 nights of reading. And it really struck me, Joanna, how similar our journeys were in so many ways.
Totally.
I know, it was amazing. Like right down to like both of the stamp returns for both of us, and then you're telling your stories of partying in London, and I'm like, oh my god, that was me, and picking up bartenders, I'm like, oh, that was me too. So we thought we would get together and chat about book writing, spirituality, awakening, stamp returns, all the things. Yes. So for those of you that don't know me, I am a direct realization tantric yoga teacher, which means I deal not just in asana or postures, but also yoga of the mental, emotional bodies and yoga of the energetic realm. I've been teaching since 2006. I've written 3 books. This was my third, my memoir. The first was 40 Days of Yoga. The second was the No More Excuses Guide to Yoga. You could say I'm all about yoga, not just postures though, about self-realization, liberation, awakening. Joanna, welcome. You've got it out on your socials now.
Got the link. You just need to share it on yours, and then I think we'll be good. I just had to make sure it was all working correctly, and it's linked through to the perfect one. So we did it.
We did it. Yay. Amazing. All right. I'm going to hand over to you to chat while I do my thing.
Over. I'll introduce myself a little bit as well. And it was this beautiful moment when I just finished my presentation at Revive Festival. So I had my book with me because I was obviously, showing people at the session that I was doing. And so I came over, and then, is that your memoir? Yes, it is. And then, let's do a memoir swap. And what a fabulous idea. So it was so beautifully, divinely aligned how we had met and swapped these books, and then actually both promptly read them. And I don't know about your experience, but I powered through yours in like, I don't know, 5 days or something. Like I was just like, it was perfect. I was reading it at the beach, and yeah, it was just it was a beautiful, easy read. I loved it, and I was also struck by the incredible similarities that we have had on our journey. It was quite beautiful, because I just thought, oh wow, we've both shared it in such a raw and generous way, actually, about the inner workings of our processing and our understanding and our consciousness as we're going through this really interesting journey of life, and all of its, contractions and expansions and the good, bad, the ugly, all of it, and actually not holding back, and I think it's something really to be proud of these days, because it gives everyone a really deep insight into how to process these things in a way, and how we move through these spaces within us and how we navigate this incredibly intrepid journey of the inner outer landscape that we are all making our way through, and we're all, you know, helping each other in sharing such a deep level. And I was really grateful for that, because obviously, despite our journeys being slightly different, there was so much similarity in the navigating of these, you know, dark times, and all of the way that we were, you know, not really honoring ourselves and our true self, and the real pain of that as well, that I think you can feel in both of our stories so acutely.
Yeah, that hunger, that search, that longing, you know, it's like we're both longing for something, and it came out sometimes through that longing for romantic partnership. But I think both of us knew too that that longing was so much deeper, the longing for truth, the longing to know, what is this life about? What is actually going on? It doesn't, you know, like what I was told growing up didn't feel right. Once I became an adult, I'm like, none of this matches. None of this matches.
Yeah. And I love your injections of humor as well. Like when you talked about like jumping on the back of the logging truck, like in your full glory, I was like, yes.
That was definitely a moment. A moment.
I could feel that moment in its full capacity, and I just was like,
yeah.
Oh, I mean, you brought it to life beautifully, because the actual writing itself was so beautifully constructed as well. And I know you've got a bit of a background in journalism and writing in that way. So yeah, it was an absolute joy and pleasure to read. So highly recommend to everyone out there, like, check it out. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. And
I think what you were saying around the necessity or the potency, the power of people sharing their inner stories, because so much of what we see, we only see people's outsides, and we don't necessarily know what they're journeying on the inside. And yet journey is so much an inner, you know, life is so much an inner journey. And, you know, for me, when I was reading through your memoir and you talked about some of the things, like you're in London. Oh my God, some of your adventures in London that unfolded, like the iPhone adventure where you went out and met the toy boy, the friend of the band, and all of those things. Like you were more explicit in some of your sexual adventures than I was, but I had those same adventures. I just wasn't quite as explicit.
Right.
And even though the title of my book is Sex, Drugs, and Mostly Yoga, and when I read how you just felt so unabashed and unashamed of like, this is what happened. And I was like, oh my God, that was me too. And I felt like I got this injection of okayness and of like permission of like, fuck yeah, we rocked around and had an epic time picking up sexy freaking men, and you know, there was a real medicine for me in reading your memoir in that way with those adventures.
I mean, all part of the rich tapestry of life,
right?
And the thing is, you know, I'm not going to say that there wasn't parts that were incredibly shameful in that also, but I had to share those parts. I know that other readers were like cringing with me, and me having to like tell that again over and over in the editing processes. I mean, it's one of the toughest things, you know, like I'd done, but at the same time, I knew that it's important to take people to that place. And it wasn't necessarily, I wasn't intentionally doing that when I was writing it, but afterwards I realized what I was doing as a natural, intuitive way to deliver this, because it's so important to allow people to have permission to feel all the things, because we're really all going through the same stuff. It may be in different outfits and different scenarios and characters and all of that. But you know what? There's truth in all of it. We've all had experiences where we may have dishonored ourselves and actually made a fool of ourselves and had embarrassing adventures that are so mortifying. I don't know why you would ever put them in a book, but here we are.
But like you said, you're like, I'm the girl with the great stories. And I could so relate, because I'm like, oh my God, I have so many stories of things that just happened. And in hindsight, it can seem a little bit like, you did what with who, where? But in the moment, it was like the glorious tapestry and adventure of life of going, sure, I'll say yes to this and I'll say yes to this. And everything actually kind of worked out okay, mostly, you know.
And I love actually on that point, like when you, on page 95 of your book, I wrote this down because it's really relevant to exactly what we're talking about. And it's, you know, these experiences come through me. They are not who I am. And as long as I stay anchored and connected to that which I truly am, I'm okay. Yeah. And this quote is referring to the psychosis and the episodes of the malevolent energy, but it's also so accurate for how we could live life, not getting attached to these things that come through us that don't necessarily represent who we are as the true self. And I thought, yes, it's exactly what we're talking about, because the only level of judgment is coming from us in our mind, to ourselves, to others,
totally.
and to experience. And that there in that we're creating the energetic resonance that goes along with it, and we're having that energetic entanglement with it, but it doesn't need to necessarily be like that. So I loved how you phrased that, because we don't need to hang on to the stuff that we all have been sort of like naturally doing just by being on this planet and growing up in this environment.
Right.
There's another way. And I think it's beautiful how you brought that to light for people really clearly, so that they could see that so accurately,
Yeah, definitely. I'm so glad that I had the adventures I had in my 20s, that I got rip-roaring drunk and this happened and that happened. I ended up in this country or that country, etc., because I don't live like that now. And I feel like if I hadn't had that kind of thing, there might be a part of me that was like, oh, I kind of missed out. And so it feels like, oh yeah, that's just a phase. That's just a part of life. That's just the wild, drunken, crazy ass, whatever that many of us go through. And you're right. If we judge ourselves for it, and if we mistake it for who we are, that's when we get stuck. That's when we start to go into the downward spiral. But if we recognize, oh, it's just part of the adventure, it's part of the fun, it'll burn through. It'll just burn through. It'll burn itself out eventually.
Totally. But, I think those experiences for me added up to a point, like I think it was the point of that kind of very long and involved story where I ended up at the police station, and they had my undergarments in an evidence bag and with like electrical tape, because they thought I'd been raped, and it's like sort of issue in the hotel grounds and all this kind of stuff, and that wasn't really what was happening at all. But that was a moment where I was just in such deep, dire mortification of myself that I was like, oh my God, I don't want to be doing this anymore. Like there's a part of me that, as fun as this is, and I'm going to give myself full license to own it and have enjoyed it and come out with this really kind of ridiculous / funny / awful story on the other side. But it was a build-up of many of those things that kind of triggered me to change my behavior, to actually really move myself out of that state, because it does get boring after a while. Like it just wasn't that, you can make fun of it as much as you want, but it's still got that kind of feeling in the background that you just want to shift out of.
Yeah, I think that's what I began to notice as well in my last sort of year or two in Whistler, Canada, which is where I was for about 7 years, is that I started to get bored with all the partying. I started to get bored with the party drugs. And so I started doing more yoga, more meditation. I was writing screenplays. I was just reorientating. And it's kind of interesting that I was already beginning to reorientate, and then things got really intense with the relationship I had with my fiance, and then ending up basically in a massive awakening, which went into psychosis and ending up in the psych ward. It was like the life just went boom. So harsh.
I was going to ask you, have you come across other people that have had that kind of Kundalini awakening that has triggered a very similar response? Because I was always told that was definitely a possibility, and it was quite more prevalent than one would think. And I just wondered, how many other people have you met and who have also been like, oh, thank you for your book, because it obviously gives them an understanding of, it makes it an ability to make sense of it all in another way, I would imagine.
Yeah, I have met so many people who have had similar experiences of awakening that starts to go towards psychosis. And some people have ended up in a psych ward. Some people have managed to manage the psychosis and not end up in the psych ward. But it is actually really, really common. And, that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, was that, actually, I was trying to write another book. My third book was going to be Love Shadows, Relationship as a Path to Awakening. So that was what I was going to write about.
Makes a lot of sense for you.
Right, totally. And I got 20,000 words in and stalled. So then I tried again. I got 20,000 words in on a new draft and I stalled. And then when I sat and felt into it, I just got this really clear guidance. You've got to write your memoir first.
Interesting.
And I was like, oh shit, really? So then I wrote the memoir, which was, you know, is kind of easy to write. Like writing for me comes fairly easily. But when I went to publish, I went into absolute terror. I was so freaking terrified. That's what I wanted to ask you about, right? I was so terrified. Too. Yeah, and I didn't want to market it, and I didn't want to promote it, and I kind of went into freeze, into shutdown. I did actually do a bunch of YouTube interviews with notable people in my life the week I launched as a way to kind of generate interest and to get it out there. But I was doing it because I thought I was supposed to do it, that's what you were supposed to do. I was trying to like be the author that did the right things. And on the inside, I was in terror and I was in freeze. And it's literally only been, I reckon, this summer that I felt completely at ease and super excited and thrilled to promote the book and to sell the book. I'm just like, fuck yeah, read this. And it feels like what's happened is that I'm no longer identified at all with the memoir, with who I was with the book. It's like the writing of the book itself put a line in the sand and was like, this stage of my life is done. I don't need to refer to it anymore. It's not that important. It can just go over. It's just there. And so then that, I reckon there was like a 2 or 3 year integration period of like total liberation. So the process of writing the book has been really fascinating like that. So that's what I wanted to ask you is, what was your experience of writing, publishing, and then the aftermath of promoting, etc.? Because you published right at the beginning of COVID, right?
I did, April 2020. And I mean, the writing itself of it, and I'm sure you probably had a similar experience, it's a hard book to write. It's not easy to go into the depths of darkness that you are not inhabiting in that moment and go back to that time. And actually, you know, the writing is an intense, and it's quite an embodied process as well. So you're really connecting with that energy again. And that is like, oh, you know, it's hard because you're not that person anymore, but you can't do a disservice. And there definitely was a part of me that was very conscious about not wanting to change it to make it any kind of nicer and to not sugarcoat anything. Like I definitely, you know, was like, oh God, am I being too dramatic about it? Am I being too honest about it? Is it going to be too much for people? And then I thought, no, I really feel like I got to honor exactly what it was. And I'm so glad I did that because that's what people really connect to. But it's a tricky process because, I mean, you're going over and over this part of your life. Like not all of it is the darkness, but there was definitely periods of the darkness. So when you have to go into it to edit it over and over again and reread the edits and all of that stuff, you got, I mean, it's not easy. And I think it takes a lot of courage to be able to do it. But, you know, I managed to move through it. And when I got to the point of publishing it, I was excited about it. And that's funny because I'd already published it on Kindle as an ebook because of the timing and COVID, everything, the physical copies came later. But I remember calling a friend of mine after it was already live and after it was already published and be like, I changed my mind. I'm not doing that. And she's like, you do realize it's already out there now. It's already done. Like, what are you doing? It's too late to do. It's too late for you can't pull it now. You've already done it. Like, are you crazy? Like, it's almost like my meltdown should have had to happen like before I was pushing the trigger on that. But I'd already done it. And then days later, I was like, no.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm not sure I'm ready for this. And so there was definitely that freak out moment, which is, I think, totally natural when you're bearing your soul and your heart to everybody in such a raw and authentic and honest level. Because not every book is like that, and not to make it better or worse than anything else, but you know, this is just for a memoir. You got to kind of go to the places within you and share that and its truth. So it's still
selective truth though, isn't it?
Yeah. And
Like,
then, you know, when I was promoting it, I got over, that was literally my only moment and I got over it. And then I, you know, in any kind of promotion and when I was doing the launch, it was very much about where I'd gotten to and launching that part of it, because I was launching this new version of me to the world, actually. So it was much more focused on that. And I still would, you know, talk about these dark times that got me there in interviews and things, but it just didn't have the beauty of writing that. And I actually highly recommend it to everyone, even if they're not going to publish it. But it's almost like if you can write your story, it is so cathartic, so healing. And I don't know about you, but, you know, it sounds like it was similar. There was another energy working through you. That's why you couldn't get that other book to happen. Something else had to come through. Yeah. And that energy didn't necessarily want to follow my schedule. It didn't necessarily want to be published when I wanted it to be published. It didn't necessarily follow any of these rules. And it happened in a very organic process that was on the own terms of this energy that wanted to become the inside hustle, nothing to do with me and my personality, my ego self wanting to control anything. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure many creative people have this experience, but for me, it was definitely a new thing. And I was really like, I mean, that was a struggle with me, you know. I've come from being a producer and account director and like, you know, everything goes like that. So, you know, managing the production and timelines and, you know, things was a natural part of my current structure that I was kind of moving out of, but was still very apparent. So it was interesting because you got to just let go and you've got to allow it to be what it is and the timing it wants to be. And then, you know, when it was actually ready, I mean, if I published it before COVID, like a couple of years before when I hoped it would be ready, I don't think it would have nearly connected with people in such a way, because during that period, people were thrown into disarray. They were actually reevaluating their lives. It was actually the perfect time for it. I couldn't quite fathom anything else. It was just so divinely perfect. I was like, oh, okay, I get it, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, it's an extraordinary thing to do. And it's just that ability to kind of almost get that energy out of your body, of the old, and just park it, see it for what it is, and then move on from it is like, that is just so valuable in itself, you know? So yeah, if you're feeling like you're still, you know, battling with your past and old versions of you, just get it all out, express it in whatever form that is. And then it's just so powerful as a cathartic tool to help you move forward.
That's so true. That's definitely what it felt like for me. It was like I was being told, before you can move into this next phase of your life, you need to write this memoir. And it was published for me November 2018. It was actually Armistice Day, I think, November 11th. Which felt really interesting too, like the end of the war. That kind of energy of that kind of day. One thing I found challenging in writing the memoir was I was so mindful of the fact that there were other people in the story who were significant players in my movie. And in order to tell my story, it's like I needed to talk about our relationships, you know, whether it was a friend or a colleague or a partner or a family member. But I was also aware that these were real people, and how would they feel? And so I'm really curious to know how you handled that. I'll share first, for me, like any of my significant partners that I wrote about, because I do talk about all of because I'm long-term monogamous serialist, I guess. I've had like 7 or 8 long-term monogamous relationships. And I messaged every single one of them and got them to read their section and okay it and make sure that they were okay with being in the book as such. I sent it to my parents as well to get them to read and okay, because it's quite a big deal. Obviously, I'm like, oh my God, what is my mum gonna think when she reads it? And, you know, she read it and then she turned around and she read it again the second time. And then she messaged me, my mum, bless her, and she's like, I'm so sorry that I didn't prepare you better for the adult world. And it was just the most, it was so heartfelt and so touching for you know, to hear that. Yeah. But I do know that I definitely shied away from and didn't go into things that might have been beneficial for my story, because I wanted to protect the other people that were involved, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I did a similar thing. And I mean, how embarrassing was it to have to go back to, I think he's the paratrooper, because obviously he's not a paratrooper, he's something else, but in the book with that whole paragraph about the sex we had while my father was dying and like, the whole thing. And so I mean, it was like, okay, but it had to be done. And so I did the same thing. I also gave it to, my dad was passed away already at that point, but I gave it to my mum. And to be honest, at the time reading it, she had a meltdown. She didn't take it very well at all. And I don't even know if she at one point thought she couldn't read the rest of it, because she was being confronted with herself and some of the things that she probably knew about herself, but wasn't really, able to reckon with at that time. And obviously it's my projection and version of her also. It's my narrative and storyline of the whole thing, which I did remind her of. And I also had to remind her that this was at one time in my life. This is not how I feel about you now. But you've got to allow me to express this. And she was worried what, I guess, other people would think about her. But I've got to say, most people, like, she's the favorite character of the book, really. And outshines me in, like, many respects. And people are always like, I've got to ask how your mum's doing. So, so I think it was very hard for her to read it.
Yeah.
She was her and I is like that one, very karmic relationship that is so, challenging.
Yeah.
Always kind of has been. And so, for me to sort of put that out in the book, and I did give her the opportunity to sort of change it. And I did say to her, look, I can take things out. And then, the other one, the significant one, was Brazilian Girl. And actually, to your point, in the beginning, I had only written this tiny little paragraph about it and just sort of moved it on. I almost didn't want to go in, because that was quite fresh at the time when I was writing it. She was with me when I was working on that book. And so I very much tried to skim over it. And then I sort of shared it with her approval, and she was devastated, because she's like, this was such a pivotal relationship in both of our lives, and this is what you're doing, you're just going like this. But I think it was I didn't know how to at that point, I really just didn't know how to position it, where to go with it, how to even write it, because it could be just too much and go in a whole direction that was going to overtake the whole book, and that wasn't really the point. But I went and rewrote it, and I wrote more and more chapters about it. And actually, I'm so glad that she did that, and she was upset, and then I actually changed it, because I think some of that is some of the most beautiful part of the book, where it kind of brings the tears and that more emotional sadness to it, because it is so, touching, and it's so deep. And so I'm really glad that she actually pushed me into that, because
I love those chapters. The sexual flexitarian. I love that too. But it's a great chapter title, the sexual flexitarian, because you don't identify as being, how do you identify on the relationship sphere?
I mean, for me, I'm very much, I would say straight, but I can't say straight, because I'm like sexually fluid in this book, right? But at the same time, that's probably, it gave me more clarity about that being so solid in my preferences. But I was open to, because I knew it wasn't about, like, for me, it wasn't about the physical attraction or the attraction to the woman. For me, this was very much a soul calling that was asking me to go into an experience that I couldn't say no to. I knew that I had to do it. It wasn't really a choice. And so that was the exploration of that whole relationship. And then I didn't really, I know, obviously I understand why now, because it became such a long and involved thing. And it really wasn't just this kind of, casual exploration that I think my personality self was thinking it was going to be in the beginning.
It felt really deep. So I love sorry, go ahead.
No, go.
I loved in the book how there was this arc between the partying and the craziness, and then the health kicks, and I'm going walking. And you did some freaking extraordinary accomplishments when it comes to walking. Like, you walked that mountain in Tanzania, right?
Kilimanjaro, I know. I know. Never any more mountains, by the way. Like,
I just loved your humor in it. And when you walked the pilgrimage trail in Spain,
the Camino,
Oh my God, I just love that when you're walking so far every day and then you get to the accommodation and everyone's just drinking red wine and it's like partying on the trail. And
because I honestly thought that was going to be my ticket out of the party thing. And then when it turned into this booze cruise on legs, I was just a little like, oh, well, if you can't beat them, join them. You know, like, what are you going to do?
Oh my God. And it just must have made the walking so much harder, but you persevered and you walked such big distances on probably less sleep and more alcohol than like you said, than you thought.
Absolutely terrible. But I wouldn't have had it any other way. I mean, it was such an adventure. And by the way, everybody, I'm not Miss Hiker. Like, that was my first multi-day hike of any proportion, and I just chose to make it a month through Spain.
Right.
But like, I've never been sort of like, you know, into like super crazy, adventure kind of extreme kind of things like that. So it was quite funny that I had embarked on that whole thing. But you know what? That's because of that Shirley MacLaine book. And she said you get zapped when you walked it. It was zapped with all this energy. And I was like, well, I think I just want to go and be zapped. I'm not quite sure what else to do. So why not a zap? Like, that's going to help.
I loved it. It was so endearing because I read that book as well in the 90s,
Yeah.
and got all inspired by Shirley MacLaine and all the things and Riley Run. I remember her walking that trail. And I just found it, there's such an endearing quality to you're just like, I'm going to go do this thing. I've never really walked and and I'm doing, oh shit, did I pack the right gear? It's amazing. And then you went to Brazil and hung out with the John of God.
Mm-hmm.
That whole crew for a significant, like, you were there for a few months, right?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, I was there for a month, and then I went away, and then I came back again for about 5 months. I think I was there for about 7 months all total, or whatever. But
and that was before kind of the scandal stuff started to surface. But you reference it, like there were people there that were already talking about some of the stuff that came out later about John of God.
Yeah.
What was your take on it when you were there? Like, did you feel like you talk about when there's a lot of light, there's a lot of shadow. Is that what you were perceiving there?
It was quite tricky to ascertain how much of it was in the frame of reference of certain characters that were presenting there. And it was tricky because I never felt any energy of that nature. I never felt anything untoward. I only felt the most probably incredibly pure, beautiful energetics, but the people that are drawn to these places are from all walks, stages of life. Most of them are going there for help, really help for specific things that are not able to be helped by anybody else. So people with quite a lot of psyche kind of things going on. There was a guy who'd been like electrocuted by lightning like a few times. There was people who obviously have cancer and all of those kinds of things, but quite sort of heavy duty, people who were addicts and things like that. So I mean, I wasn't really sort of so aware of that. I was in my own little, like, I'm just exploring this. I've never been to a trance channel medium and like, oh, he's slicing people open on stage under spiritual anesthetic. Like, what are the chances? So it was
spiritual surgery, right? Not like actually slicing people open.
No, actually slicing people open.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, because there was the spiritual surgeries, which is the non-slicing open and the physical, but then there was the physical surgeries. So there was both. So I saw him literally, and people would go under spiritual anesthetic, but there was no other anesthetic. And then he would be in trance channel, and he would get these tools, which looked like they'd come from the 1950s, which was slightly like, it was like, woo. And then he would come over and he would have like an assistant nurse kind of thing. And he would just slice into someone's, like head or chest. And I saw him like pull out stuff from someone's stomach. And funnily enough, you'd think it would be like an explosion of blood, like in the movies, but it wasn't. There'd be like a slight trickle. He'd pull something out and then he would sew it up, and it was like, he'd pull out these things, and it was so fascinating. Like, I've never, I mean, I would never have had an experience like it in all my life, but I saw quite a lot of that. If I wasn't working in the current space, holding the energy for that kind of work, because you can only do it the frequency is quite high, I think. But no, there was a lot of actual physical, real
Wow.
surgeries taking place, of a nature that you would just someone standing on stage, like in trance, like.
Yeah. So what did you, I can't remember from the book now because it was a few months ago that I read it. But that experience with John of God, like you said, you're there for a number of months. What was the biggest shift for you in that period?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Yeah, or insight, realization,
you know what, there was a big insight into a lot of the old spiritual paradigm kind of stuff that I realized I was doing all the stuff, but it wasn't working because I was giving my power away to other people knowing better than me, and whether that was beings of light or whether that was other spiritual practitioners. But I was doing a lot of stuff and it wasn't leading anywhere, which is what got me there in the first place. I was sort of just like, I need to crack this. Like, I don't understand why I'm supposedly doing all the right things and I'm not making big shifts. I'm not making any progress. It's just like, I feel like I'm in a loop. And so that was the driving force between being there and staying there. It was really spiritual development. And I probably had very much more experiences of getting to know myself at that level of the true self, at that level of my soul, and having that become more visceral to my daily life, and even I look back on even some of the journaling that I did there, and I'm not even actually believing the capacity that I have of myself. I'm still questioning it or saying it's not right. So I was very much moving through that process within myself. Even though I was like, I was practicing my channeling and stuff, and I'd get these names, like I think there was one like Hilarion, and I had no idea what that meant. So I was like, well, that's nothing, dismissed it, right? But actually, meanwhile, it's all this quite profound stuff that was leading me, but I was still quite dismissive of it because it wasn't coming through in the way that I had seen in everybody else doing it.
Right.
So I was not giving it as much credence because it wasn't showing up in the way that my mind wanted it to. And therefore, because I kept dismissing it, it wasn't amplifying and necessarily becoming as powerful as it does now for me, so to speak, because I've really
that makes sense. Because in your book, I don't know if readers can see, but there's these italicized portions in between each chapter. I'll just read this one just randomly. We're on page 157. Your resistance is the persistence of the outdated and the old, of the been and gone. You have no ties to what lies ahead. Stop reaching for what has gone before, as where you are going is beyond the beyond. There is nothing to hold on to, just your courage as you step into the unknown. Step into the potential of your highest expression of the divine. Now, that's just a little sample. When I read those pieces, I had quite a profound sense of recognition, because I could sense, like the personality, you writing the story, etc. And then there's that shift into just channeling through these very clear words and clear messages. And I loved how you had both in the memoir. And when I started reading your book, I felt like I was getting the exact message that I needed at that time for myself, which of course is what so often happens.
Not the first time I've heard that.
Totally. And it just reminded me, like when I came home from after the psychosis, it was 2004, and in 2006 I wrote Saturn Explodes, which was me trying to make sense of all the things that had happened. Instead of Saturn Returns, Saturn Explodes.
I love it.
And in that I would go back and forth between sort of a channeled voice where I would ask questions and receive answers, and then my story. And it just reminded me of that. I was like, oh, that's very similar to what was happening for me back then. I never went anywhere with that particular manuscript. It's, but it no doubt served a purpose for me to just write it out. So when you just were talking then about the channeling, it's like, oh yeah, because you're doing it. That's what's happening, right? And the inside hustle.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting how that worked. I realized only after the fact. That was my editor asked me to put that in because I sent it to her for something else. And she was like, why is this not in the book? Are you crazy? And I'm like, whoa, I'm not putting that in. No way. And then she's like, I want you to think about it, because this, in between each chapter, to punctuate it, how beautiful, and this is really powerful stuff. And I was like, oh gosh, like, ooh, I don't know about this. But you know what? She was 100% right, because what happens, and it was obviously completely guided to be this way, is that the personality part of the story allows us to access these parts within us that we're like, ugh, or we resonate with, that is bringing up the energy, that then that lighter kind of stuff recalibrates. So it's actually a constant recalibration energy that is working with people on a personal level, no matter where they're at, when they read it, which I loved. But I sort of felt the same with you, because with, you know, your book, there was so much obviously recognition about these places that we've all been into our psyche. And I think although we've moved on from, you know, that intensity of that old version that is a bit more guided by the personality self, and even though we're looking in, there's a bit of that judgment and all of that stuff going on, but even coming out the other side of that in regards to like relationships, you know, because your book was so full of all this relationship energy, and I stepped into more of a really wanting to bring that energy into alignment within myself. So I got such beautiful reflections of where there was still some of these energetics to play within my field when I was reading it. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, that's given me a good insight into that part. That's sort of still, because I'm at the moment wanting to like move into a sacred union partnership, you know. I'm like, I really want to up level that into a different space, and have been for a little while, but I've been coming into my own after this book and everything. And so it was actually quite interesting how pertinent it was that although parts of me have moved on, there's other parts that are like lagging, you know, that need a little bit more of this divine reflection that you're providing in your journey of relationships, and how that was in recognition of some of the more unconscious ways or limited belief systems I had within myself about them as well. I love that. Yeah, really beautiful.
You know, what's interesting is like after I published that, I actually met a man about 6 months later, and we were together for 3 years, and it felt like that relationship broke pattern. He was really caring, and he knew how to hold space for me. And it was just such a beautiful, amazing relationship to be in. And it also triggered stuff I didn't even know was there. But because he was able to hold space, and I also knew how to process myself, I was able to, for the first time ever, be in a relationship where I was in the darkness, and it was the deepest darkness I'd been in for about a decade or so, and I was still being loved and cared for. So it was massively healing for me to go through that 3-year journey with this particular person. You know, there was some fundamental misalignment, so the journey was only 3 years, but it served a beautiful purpose, and we're still really good friends now. It was really extraordinary, and I almost feel like I could literally write another memoir because of what's happened in the last 5 years, where things from my childhood have been revealed that I had no idea in 2018 that makes so much more sense of everything that I talk about in this memoir. It's like the missing jigsaw puzzle pieces finally dropped in. It's like, oh, that's why the psychosis. Oh, that's why the dissociation. Oh, that's why that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and I think that's a really important and beautiful point, is because just because we've written these books, and also they come to a more expanded, sort of zoomed out conclusion in both of them, which is also just so interesting in how similar they were. But, you know, it doesn't necessarily stop this journey and process. And as I was just mentioning about what I'm working on within myself, like there's always just an ability to redirect or to come into awareness about something else, and leveling up all the time to bring in more expanded experiences that are going to be more joyous and loving and in alignment with the true self. You know, I think it's like we can only handle so much at once, so it can't happen all at once. And there's also this idea of perfection, like, I mean, forget it, but you know, like there is the divine perfection of the imperfection of all things that is so still felt and still able to be navigated as we go through this beautiful journey of all of it. You know, it's not like we're kind of trying to be into this totally in alignment, everything's perfect, always in flow, you know, versions of ourselves now that we've been through and, you know, shared all of these really hard parts of our journey, because there's probably going to be upcoming parts of the journey that are going to be also equally as challenging in other respects, because we're in such a, you know, contracting, expanding kind of space. So I sort of love that we're really upfront about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it also points out that the narrative or the story of me is not a fixed thing. And when I tell the story of me, the story I tell keeps changing as I keep shifting and changing, perspective shifts and changes, things melt. So I know I can write another memoir, cover some of the same territory, but it'll be a different kind of story because of where I'm coming from. And then it's like, oh shit, everything's made up. Everything's just meaning making. Everything's just narrative, which can be really disorientating for some people, because it's like, well, where's the solid ground then? Did it happen or did it not happen? It's like, well, certain things happen, but how do we perceive them? You know, what meaning do we give to what happened? How do we feel about what happened? Well, I used to feel this way about it. Now I feel that way about it. In the future, I might feel that way about it. And yeah, for me, with all of that kind of recognition of meaning making and narrative and story, it really motivates me to find that deep center where the stillness resides and where everything is unchanging and infinite, you know.
Yeah, it was it is, and I think I even put something like that. I sort of caveated, like, you know, this is how I feel now, but I know that this is going to shift and change. And even I'm sure, like, you're probably the same with the work that you do now. I feel like it's going to be a different version of this in 5 years for each of us.
Yeah,
you know?
totally.
The way that we're showing up now is absolutely going to evolve and shift and change. And step into new territory that's exciting on the soul level, you know, exciting to the true self. So why wouldn't we? And when we ignite more of those passions and desire and allow ourselves more of those desires that are full of this beautiful life tapestry and allow us to go to these places, it's always going to be at that level of, you know, the space that we're inhabiting meaning something totally different.
Yeah, I'm definitely feeling that right now. I'm in a major transition that has definitely, I think it's been ignited by doing so many festivals with such strong intentionality over the last 2 or 3 months. And I can feel this huge shift that's taking in how I perceive myself, position myself, what I do and how I am, which is freaking exciting. It's like, whoa, brand new territory opening up.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Can I just say one thing that totally blew my mind in your book is that the psych facility being called Lionsgate. I was like, right, my God. Like, I
know. Right in Lionsgate. Like, I was admitted to Lionsgate Hospital in the middle of Lionsgate, right when Venus was transiting the sun. And it was like all of these astrological I'm like, what?
You can't, I mean, this is the stuff I love, like, about how spirit works. Like, you can't even make this stuff up. It is so amazing. I was just like, that is incredible. And you know, and you can draw a totally different perspective about it due to that, you know. It's like, it's so I just love that. I was like, oh, this is exactly like me.
Yeah, it was. When I realized, I didn't know about Lionsgate at the time. I didn't find out about that until years later. And I was like, wait a second, you mean this major astrological event was happening right at the time and I end up in Lionsgate Hospital? Like,
I mean,
amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm aware of time and thinking we should probably start to wrap this up. And what I'm curious about is that, what would you say to people who are considering writing their memoir and are scared shitless, don't know where to start, like, woo, but they can feel that call? What would you say to that person?
Well, I originally never started writing a book, actually. I started writing blog posts and then realized I was far too verbose to get any kind of story into one post. So I was like, okay, forget it. I guess I'm writing something else. But I just started writing these vignettes because I didn't know, like, don't get tangled in the structure or trying to write a book. Like, just start expressing what is wanting to get out of your body or come through you, or, you know, whatever it is, because then you can figure out putting it together. And also, don't write it for anybody else, write it for you. You know, I mean, I 100% wrote this for me as like a beautiful dedication to myself and my own journey, and yes, to help others as well, and the intention. But it was definitely, you know, I knew I needed to do it for myself. And so don't get tangled up about the writing style either, you know, like, I mean, you've had some beautiful experience as a writer. I did not. I've not published any other books. I have not worked in journalism. I worked in advertising. So yes, I could do writing. And I remember that I did a couple of writing courses in London, very small ones, you know, it's not like I went and got a degree in it, but I just gave myself permission to just write. And so just get it out and just start the process. And just fill up journals, cheap journals, just fill them up. That's what I did. And I pulled and rewrote stuff from a lot of my journals. And so it can be just a very easy process as much as we allow it, you know. So don't get tangled up in all of that until after you've got, and then you'll have a bunch of material and you figure out what to do with it later. And also with the help of someone else to help you do that maybe at that point. But just start writing. Just start. And don't judge it, don't make it wrong or right, just let it flow and let it go, and don't even read back on it. Maybe just allow yourself the permission to just purge. I mean,
this was my third book, and the first two were also non-fiction, but they were more, I had a map or a journey. Like when I wrote those first two, I wrote out the table of contents and a lot of detail, and structured it and organized it. And then I could just write to each topic. So my first book literally took 2 weeks to do the table of contents, and then 2 weeks to write the first draft, because it just came through so easy. And it was just, I had the structure. Whereas, and that taught me that basically every day I just sit down and write 2,000 words no matter what. And I would never read over what I'd written. And the intention was just get the first draft done and then look at it. But with this one, I couldn't really write a table of contents. I didn't know where I was going to go. And I was like, fuck, how do I do this? How do I? So what I did was I did the same thing in terms of, I set myself a goal of 2,000 words a day, no matter what, 5 days a week, and to not read over anything until I'd finished the first draft. And I would just literally sit down and I would use my 5 senses to find my way into the chapter. And so I would describe what I was feeling, what I was looking at, what I was seeing. And by doing that, it would begin to trigger memories or flow or whatever. And I would always read the last page of the last chapter, so I had continuity. And so once I did that, I would find that the theme of the chapter would emerge, and I would write the chapter. And then my intention was to always write the chapter in such a way that it ended on a cliffhanger, that it ended on a question, that it ended on something where someone's like, but what happens? And they'd turn the page. And so that was kind of my structure. And
cool. That's great.
And I remember my editor, Feet, over in Canada, he'd been one of my friends in Whistler, Canada, an amazing writer himself. And when he was reading it, he was like, oh my God, my head is spinning. He goes, you're in this location, and then you're in this location, and then you're in this location, and then you're over here. He's like, can you streamline it a little bit? But that, for me, that process of, that's kind of how my mind works sometimes, is that I'm all the places at once. So
multidimensional.
So I'd be writing in Langholm, which would take me to a memory in childhood, which would take me to a memory in my early 20s, and finding the way that they were all linked and cohesive in the story of it without jarring people too much. So that's why we came up with the idea of having the location and the date at the top every time I change location and date, because otherwise it'd be like, where in the world are we? Where in time are we? Where is she taking me?
That's smart, because I did at one point got a little bit confused. Like my mind really wanted to make a really smart structure that was not linear, and it was like here, there, and everywhere. And like, that's my version that my personality self was a little bit attached to. And I had to it got so overwhelming, and I couldn't move forward. It literally stopped me from doing what I needed to do. So I just was like, I surrender it. I'm just going to go back and allow myself to go through it sequentially, because it was just too complicated for me to try and do it so and then it's like, okay, cool. And it gave me so much more freedom just to be, truthful to what was. And so it's a good point. You did that in a really smart way, that it worked for you because it was so intuitively written like that, which reflects you wrote it, which is beautiful, but yeah, don't
Yeah.
let the overwhelm of information get too much and complicated as well, because that also can just stop us in our tracks inadvertently, and then we just don't know where to go. So
yeah, and I think that's it. It's finding like, oh, so you went chronologically, which is great, because you're like, okay, this happened and then this happened, and you can see the arc and what's happening. Yeah, whereas for me, because I was, you know, I started with the end in some ways, or the middle. I started with this, you know, ending up in the psych ward, and then I looped from where I was now, and it was like this all the time. Revealing more of the story, but that was just the intuitive sense. I didn't know what was going to come through necessarily, but I'd walk every day and I'd start to get kind of downloads in terms of like, oh, and now go here, and now go here, and now go here. Yeah. Beautiful. So for all you writers out there, or people who don't even identify as writers, if you feel the urge to write your memoir, start where you are, write the first draft without rereading anything, and just focus on numbers of words per day possibly, but just get that first draft done and then see what you've got. Give it to an editor, give it to a beta reader, give it to someone to work with. Yeah,
definitely. And just allow the energy to flow through, you know. Like I look up back on some of my old journals and writing, and I'm like, I can't believe I wrote that. That's actually amazing. So like, just allow yourself, you know, but I haven't read it in like maybe, you know, 10 years, 15 years or something, but just when you just allow yourself the freedom that you can, often it comes out better than you would expect anyway. And so, yeah, just I highly applaud your sort of instigation of how to go about that, because it's really beneficial, I think, in that writing process, when especially if you're not a trained writer as well, you know, it's freedom and permission to not worry
totally. Yeah, I mean, I'd written so many words, like millions and millions and millions of words. Like I used to write a blog where I would write 5 articles a week, you know, so, and I wrote morning pages, 750 words a day for years. So the sheer volume of what was coming through really exercised the muscle. So I got into a space where I could just let things flow through, and it definitely helped massively.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Love that.
Any final words, Joanna? This is Joanna Walden, author of The Inside Hustle, an epic memoir of her spiritual journey.
Well, you know, I think it's such a pertinent time on the planet right now, and especially now in this month of March in 2023, it's just, we're moving into incredibly powerful times, and it's just more exciting and more exciting and more exciting, you know. And so it's a beautiful time to really dive deep within the self and be at one with what is, you know. And you know, both Kara-Leah's and I, our books give you permission to do that, and each in their own beautiful way. And so I highly recommend that you spend a bit more time with yourself, for yourself, as we move through this next trajectory all together, because we're all actually energetically and supporting each other on levels that we may not be aware of with our personality mind. And you know, all of these things, like these beautiful books that we have. Oh, I can't see it because I've got the screen thing on, but
the screen thing, I can help with that.
There you go. Like
I'll be the book holder.
Like your beautiful book as well is you know, is an expression of these times that we're in, and making peace with ourselves so that we can really all step into that really magnificent expression of who we truly are. And so, you know, that's what lights me up every day. I know your work is similar, and you help people do that too. So, you know, it's an honor to be here with you, and I'm so glad that we got to beautifully bump into each other at Revive and swap memoirs and do this. Like, how cool!
I know. It was so awesome. And that, you know, that also speaks to living in this way of like spontaneity and freedom and generosity, and just trusting that flow and going, oh, well, you know, because what I notice is I can never know how a small action that I take can lead to who knows what down the line. Yeah, right?
Totally. I love that you instigated that for both of us, because you know, I was just sort of like, oh, after my session, all a bit out of it. And then it was like, suddenly we're on Instagram and you were filming, and I thought we were taking a still photo and you're live. And I'm like, whoa. I mean, you were really on it. I was like, whoa, she's good at this. But it was so beautiful. And I'm so glad I got the honor to read your book and the sharing of your deep expression in that. And it was just, also lovely for me to feel and hear someone of a very similar journey, and just thinking, oh, so beautifully aligned and such a beautiful reflection of each other. I just loved it. It was just beautiful. Yeah.
Freaking awesome.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you to all those of you watching live here with us, and all of you who will watch this over time. Who knows?
Yes.
Maybe you're watching this in 100 years' time.
Amen.
We don't know. My book's available on audio and then all the places, Amazon, etc. And Joanna, I'm guessing yours is on all the places as well. Do you have an Audible version?
I do. Yeah, I do.
Epic. So you can listen. Did you read yours?
Oh yeah, 14 and a half hours of my dulcet tones right here.
Don't know, I think I'm about 14 and a half hours as well, something similar. So you can listen to us read you our memoirs